Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Real Review Live. This is our 9th The Real Review Live broadcast, and we're thrilled to have you online with us today. We know that there are at least 90 participants here at the moment, and we've heard some of you have ordered wines from the wineries, which is great. If you don't happen to have any of the wines that we're tasting, just grab something similar or appropriate and sip along with us. It's all about Italian wine tonight, as you know, Italian varietals, Ausitals, if you like, Australian interpretations of Italian grape varieties. There are 8 of them. We've got 2 whites, 2 rosés, and 4 reds. And for those of you who are hooked on all things Italian, we are doing the next actual live event is a dinner that we're doing at Pendolino Restaurant in Sydney on October the 8th, and that's and it got some Italian food, obviously, to go with the aged and rare wines that we'll be serving. Lovely Italian meal from Pendolino. If you're in New South Wales, you can come to it. Otherwise, I'm sorry, you'll have to wait. But there you go. So hope you're all ready to go. I am. And I'll start off with a few words about Italian varieties. We know, I'm sure you're all aware that Italy is one of the greatest wine producing countries in the world. They would say it's the greatest, of course. There are hundreds of grape varieties in Italy that people don't grow in other countries. We grow quite a lot of them here now, but most of them are still undiscovered by the rest of the world. And it's quite possible that as we develop the industry, the wine industry, and as possibly the climate warms, we will need to discover more and more of these varieties, because some of them go very, very well in hot and dry climates, and ours is getting hotter and drier. Varieties such as Montepulciano, which we're tasting 3 versions of tonight, are particularly good in hot and dry climates. Enough of that. How long has Australia had Italian grape varieties? Well, in dribs and drabs for a very long time. Some of them would have come out with the very earliest shipments in the early 19th century. Best's at Great Western has had Dolcetto since the 1860s. They didn't know it was Dolcetto until recently, but we have had some of these varieties. Italian varieties in Australia didn't really get ahead of steam until recent times, the 80s, 90s and noughties. My first recollection of Italian varieties was when Carlo Carino and Montrose winery up at Mudgee had Nebbiolo, Sangiovese and Barbera, and they produced some wines from those varieties up there. Unfortunately, they didn't get much traction, and they didn't have continuity. But the next significant thing that happened, I think, was Mark Lloyd at Coriole, and we have a Coriole wine here first up, the Fiano. Mark Lloyd, who is a bit of a visionary in matters to do with grape varieties and exciting new grape varieties, especially Italian grape varieties, planted Sangiovese in 1985 and produced his first Coriole Sangiovese in 1987, vintage. And that is the longest continuing line of Sangiovese in this country. He also pioneered Fiano, which we'll come to in a moment, but he also grows Barbera and Montepulciano and does a very good job of them. So I think it's all part of the food culture, really, that has invigorated this interest in Italian wines. When I started off in the industry 35 years ago, the whole industry was being driven, in my opinion, by the wine shows, where wine is judged without food. And fruity wines, the most fruity wines were getting all the trophies, and then the most fruity and oaky wines were getting all the trophies. But a few people realised that those wines didn't actually go very well with food. They might have been impressive and they might have won gold medals and trophies, but they didn't go very well with food. And Gary Crittenden from the Mornington Peninsula was another one who was very early on this kick of discovering the savouriness and the food compatibility of Italian grape varieties. The Pizzini family, and others in the King Valley. There's a whole lot of Italian farmers in the King Valley who used to grow hops and tobacco, and then they switched to grapevines in the early 80s, late 70s, at the behest of Brown Brothers, who were buying their grapes at the time, and several of them, of course, developed their own wineries from then on, Pizzinis, Del Zottos, and so on, a whole lot of them. So to me, that's it's a really interesting development. We discovered that wine is to go with food at the table, and fruity wines don't always go with the food that you want to have. Savoury wines do. And it's the sapidity, the savouriness of the Italian varieties, certainly when they're made in Italy, that helps them to go so well with so many foods. And if you go around Italy like you do in France, you'll find that they have different foods and different wine styles that come from the same region, and they go so well together. It's no accident. They started off with the food products, and then they fashioned the wines to go with those foods. They didn't fashion them to win medals at wine shows. So that's what makes wine, Italian varieties, so compatible, I think, is their savouriness. And savouriness is the opposite of fruitiness. That's the easiest way to put it. So they need tannin, they need acid, they need structure to go with food. And they don't need to have too positive, too strong a fruit character. Grape varieties which have very strong fruit character, very strong personalities, tend to be not so compatible with so many foods. So we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along, hopefully. So without further ado, Coriole, good place to start. Coriole, where better, because they really are probably the most distinguished winery in Australia as far as Italian grape varieties goes. Sorry, Pizzinis, but they were there just a bit before you. The Pizzinis are fantastic as well. So this is the Coriol Rubato Fiano, which is a reserve Fiano, 19 vintage Coriole McLaren Vale. And this wine they've been producing a regular Fiano, which is a little cheaper and a little more straightforward, a little more fruit driven for a while, but this is their reserve Fiano. The word rubato is a musical term, and it means to play freely. In other words, to extemporize or to deviate from the well-trodden path. And I think that's what the Lloyd family of Coriole were getting at with this wine. It's a little bit more exploratory, a little bit more adventurous. It's barrel fermented and it's complex. And there are only 500 bottles made. 500 bottles is not very much. So the wine itself, the variety comes from the southern part of Italy, so Campania. I think they grow a bit of it in Sicily. It's grown in several parts of the southern half of Italy, Fiano, and it's a very well-known variety in Italy, but only recently arrived in Australia. It's one of those varieties that Mark Lloyd tasted when many travels that he made to Italy, and decided that it would have a future in Australia. Let's have a taste. Nice, bright, straw yellow colour, youthful wine, only a year old. And the nose is nutty. It's got this lovely barrel fermented character, but it's got a creamy yeast leaves derived character, spiciness, stone fruits, hints of lychee, really quite a complex nose and really moreish. It draws you in. Really good intensity, directness, focus, length, good flavour. It's got generosity to it, but it's certainly not overblown like some of the Fianos I've tasted from Italy. It's tight and it's savoury, it's layered and it's lingering. It's got this really mouth-watering, refreshing, appetising kind of after effect. It really makes you want to eat something. It's a real food wine. A very stylish wine indeed. We scored it 94, which is obviously a very high silver ribbon score, excellent score. It's a top ranked wine. It was rated number 2 out of 29 Fianos from that vintage from across Australia. There aren't that many, but 29 we tasted, 2019, so there's quite a few. We would say drink it now and for the next 6 or 7 years to get the best out of it. It's a $50 wine, so that's because it's a reserve wine, but their regular Fiano is much cheaper. Bloody good wine, very, very good wine. Now, what do they recommend that you eat with it? And they're great food and wine people, the Lloyds. They have a restaurant, they have they're one of the first people to produce olives and olive oil in McLaren Vale. They are really real foodies. So, of course, this would carry a bit of weight. But Duncan Lloyd, the winemaker, has suggested roast pork with all the trimmings. Very controversial, but I wouldn't doubt it for a minute. They know what they're talking about, the Lloyds. It does have the intensity and the grip and the acidity to go with quite strong flavour. Pork, of course, is not a particularly strong flavour anyway. It depends how you source it, of course, but I think that that's probably a very good suggestion. But I think this would go really well with seafood as well. So fish, shellfish, crustaceans, excellent. So Coriole, marvellous winery, marvellous people. And I find it hard to tip that out, that one. Let's move on to number 2, which is another Italian white variety, Arneis. Arneis is from Piedmont. That's where it hails from. Piedmont, of course, is famous for its red wines, Nebbiolo, which they make into Barolo, Barbaresco. And they have Barbera, they have Dolcetto. Not very many white varieties up there, but this is one of them, Arneis. The other one is Cortese, which we're not having tonight, but the Arneis is even rarer than Fiano in Australia. I think Fiano is getting a real momentum at the moment, whereas Arneis is still in its infancy in this country. It makes a delicate dry white in Piedmont, and that's pretty much what we have here. It's the Santolin wines. I'll put it where it's supposed to be, which is there. Santolin is in the Yarra Valley, and this is what they call their Cosa Nostra Arneis, 2019 vintage. Santolin is a very new outfit. They only started, I think, in 2012. Adrian and Rebecca Santolin, very small, artisanal type producer. They describe themselves as lo-fi winemakers, in other words, fairly hands-off, not perhaps exactly natural wines, but close, and very low intervention wines. So they use natural yeasts. They don't add anything more or less than they need, or take away anything that they wouldn't normally to make a low intervention wine. That's their goal. They also produce Vermentino, Friulano, Sangiovese, Nero d'Avola, and Negro Amaro. So a lot of varieties in the mix there. They also produce Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are much more normal Yarra Valley varieties. But the Cosa Nostra is what they do for something different. These are wines that are exploratory and a little bit left field. Adrian has some Italian heritage, and so that's why the interest in Italian grape varieties. You often find that with people producing Italian varieties, that they're either from Italian stock or they have some close contact with that country. So let's taste it. And this is a beautiful wine. This is just such a gorgeous perfume. There's a touch of honey. There's some nutty aromas there from a bit of barrel ferment. It's complex. It's not oaky, but it has that extra texture and degree of complexity from barrel ferment. There's this lemon, honey, pear-like aromas. Gorgeous fragrance on this wine. And not unlike the Fiano, it's complex and layered on the palate, but it's not fat or heavy or overblown. It's got beautiful acidity holding it together. It's poised and fine and tight and crisp and refreshing on the finish and long in the flavour. It makes you want to have another sip. It's a very appetizing wine. Only 140 dozen made, so again, a very limited production wine. But of course, you won't find these varieties, at least these first two, made in big licks because they're only just creating a market for it now. So how did we score it? We scored it 93 out of 100, which is a good, strong silver ribbon score. We've said drink it from now until the next 5 or 6 years. It's $25. Ridiculous price, $25 for that. I think that is a great bargain. But then all of the wines in this Cosa Nostra range, the reds as well that I've tasted, have all been exceptional value. But you might have to fight to find them because they're made in tiny licks. This wine, we don't have a ranking because there are very few Arneises from the Yarra Valley. So We can't tell you. All I can say is that we liked it a hell of a lot. The palate, yeah, I think that's just, it makes you want to eat something. It gets the salivary glands working. That's what Italian varieties do. We asked the winemaker, Adrian Santolin, what he would serve with this, and he said, Rick Stein's seafood risotto. I think that's a very, very smart, not only is it a good match, I think, but it's got a historic connection, because the risottos, of course, when you're in Piedmont, the home of Arneis, there's a lot of risotto up there because it's a rice growing, it's on the end of the rice growing country anyway. It's very much risotto territory. So beautiful wine, and we can move on and have a couple of questions now with any luck. There will be something there. And what is my favorite Italian wine and food match? Susan is asking. Gee, Susan, you make it really hard. There are so many of them. I find that a very hard question to answer. You know, I can go back to the great meals I've had, and there was a fantastic meal I had in the Trattoria della Posta in Piedmont a few years ago, where we had this gorgeous risotto with prawns and monkfish, and we had that with a local Arneis, and it was a fantastic match. So, you know, that was extraordinary experience, which will live with me for a long time. My first experience of Fred Pizzini's Sangiovese, no, sorry, his Nebbiolo was down at the King River Cafe many, many years ago. And we had suckling pig with that. And the wine was tannic and really a little difficult to drink before the food came along. When the food came out, it was softened, the proteins and the tannins interact, and suddenly the wine was transformed, and I understood what Nebbiolo is all about. Another question. What other great white grape varieties are most similar tasting to Fiano and Arneis? I'd say the other variety that we're really showing a lot of interest in is Vermentino, which is a Sicilian variety, which is doing a lot of stuff in Australia now. A lot of people are growing it, making good wine. It's not the same. No, I wouldn't say anything is similar to either of those varieties. Particularly, you know, there are lots of other delicate white varieties like Vernaccia, which are tight and delicate and a little bit neutral in flavour, but they go really well with food. Verdicchio, things like that. I think there is a commonality with Italian wines. If you can imagine a rich Chardonnay from Burgundy with a lot of oak and a lot of richness and fatness, this is the opposite of that style. These are tight, fine, acid-driven wines that are really dry, really lip-smacking, and really make you want to drink something. Anyway, let's move on to Rosé. And first Rosé we've got is the Angulong, which is from Orange in New South Wales. And Angulong is a very old property. It was started, I think, in the early 20th century, the early 1900s. And it was a wool and sheep producing property. Since then, the Crossing family owns it now. The Crossing family have owned it since 1950, quite a long time, producing cattle. And since 1998, they've had a vineyard. So they produce wine since about 98. But they're a bit out to one side. They're not on the main road. So they've opened their cellar door in this historic town called Millthorpe, which is off the Sydney Road. So as you're driving to Orange from Sydney, you'd go through Millthorpe. That's where their cellar door is, in the historic Bluestone stables. The Crossing family do a very good job. They grow quite a lot of grape varieties, the usual ones, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Shiraz, Cabernet, and so on. But they grow quite a lot of Italian varieties, and they do a good job. And they don't charge too much for it. They're a very good value for money wines. This one is a $26 rosé. Well, that's about the ballpark, but a lot of their wines are the same price, but you're getting, you know, a full-bodied red for that sort of money, which is quite remarkable. 600 meters the altitude of the property, so it's not particularly high for Orange. I mean, Orange goes as high as 1,000 meters in altitude, and those, of course, are the vineyards that produce the great sparkling wines, the delicate dry white wines. But if you want to produce nice, ripe, full-bodied red wine, then you need to be in lower altitude, and they can do that very well at Angulong. This is called Fossil Hill Sangiovese Rosé 2019. And Sangiovese is from, of course, Italy's central part. Tuscany is the most famous region for Sangiovese, but it's the most widely planted grape in all of Italy. It's grown almost throughout Italy. Sangiovese everywhere, but the best of it is from Tuscany. And of course, Chianti is the most famous wine, Brunello di Montepulciano, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, and several other wines produced in that area. They're just the most famous ones, but you can make good rosé out of it. You can make good rosé out of a lot of these varieties. Nebbiolo makes good rosé. So Angulong, that's what to taste like. Let's have a taste. It's very pale colour, very pale indeed, and that's very much a Provence type rosé colour. Pale, but a good colour, beautiful colour. When I started off in the wine business 30-odd years ago, 35 years ago, all the rosés were dark in colour and much darker than that. But now the fashion is very much for Provence-style rosés. So pale in colour, delicate wines, dry and not sweet, whereas in the early days, oh gosh, they were sweet. Okay, beautiful wine. Let's have another sniff of that. Herbs, strawberries, cherries, a touch of rhubarb, a hint of spice. Beautiful nose. And the palate is very much the same, crisp, dry, refreshing, appetizing, a good food wine. If it was sweet, it wouldn't be such a good food wine. The acidity and the dryness really give you this cleansing, refreshing, appetizing aftertaste. It's very much a fruit wine. The next one we're going to taste is a contrast. But this one is a straightforward fruit wine. It's the grapes that are doing the talking. They haven't tried to make a complex wine. They've tried to make a really straight down the middle of the line, good wine to go with food. We scored at 95, so a gold ribbon. We said drink it now until 21, so another year. Well, that's a bit conservative, another 1 or 2 years. Rosé is best drunk young. This wine was a top-ranked wine. It was rated #1 out of 27 rosés from Australia. Sangiovese rosés are from 2019 vintage. So a really, really smart little wine. And we asked the winemaker, Ben Crossing, what he would serve with that. And he said barbecued prawns. Well, barbecued prawns goes with just about anything in my view. I'll have barbecue prawns with whatever you like to put in the glass. But I reckon it would go really, really well with that wine. So I totally agree with that, Ben. Moving along to number 4, the Catlin wine. This is another rosé, but a totally different kettle of fish, if I might use that expression. It's made from Montepulciano, but that's not the reason that it's different. The way it's made, I think, as much as the grape variety is why it's so different. This is from the Adelaide Hills. Catlin GB's Rosé 2019. And this wine, what can I tell you about Catlin? Well, Darryl Catlin is the winemaker and the owner of this little company. He is the winemaker at Sidewood in his daytime job, which is quite a big winery in the Adelaide Hills. He previously worked for about 10 years at Shaw and Smith, so he's a very accomplished winemaker. He founded this brand, his own brand, in 2013, so it's quite a young brand. Darryl grew up in the Barossa. His parents had a vineyard there. He loves minimal intervention wines, wild ferments, and that's the sort of wine he's making here. It's GB's Rosé. We don't know who GB is, but that's a mystery, but it doesn't matter. The rosé is very good. The wine is made from Montepulciano. Now, Montepulciano is from the eastern side of the leg of Italy. That's on the Adriatic side. It's Abruzzo is the province, and Montepulciano d'Abruzzo is almost as popular and as widespread as Chianti. It's a big production wine in Italy. It can be anything from light-bodied, young drinking wines right through to heavy aging, tannic, full-bodied wines. And it can be rosé. So it's a very adaptable variety. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a very good variety for our warmer regions because it's retains its acidity in hot climates, and it puts up with droughty conditions. It doesn't need as much water. So this wine, first thing I noticed is the colour is very, very different to the Angulong. It's got a deeper colour, but it's also got a bit of development to it, a salmony kind of tinge to it, which is probably because it's been barrel fermented, and barrel fermentation introduces some oxygen into the wine, and that tends to speed the maturation of the colour a little bit. And the wine is very, very complex on the nose. It's the nuttiness and the savouriness from barrel fermentation is there. It's not oaky, but it has transformed the nose. It's not just simple fruit anymore, although there are strawberry liqueur, cherry, summer berry type aromas there too. And the wine is something that you could sit and sniff for a while and not get bored with. It's not your conventional rosé. Let's taste it. That's a pretty full-bodied rosé. It's got lots of richness, lots of weight, lots of body, lots of volume to the flavour. It's layered, it's complex, and it's dry, it's refreshing. But the layered flavours, it's really quite a different wine. I think most people would, it's not an introductory rosé for sure. It's a rosé for people who like really serious rosé. We scored at 95. In other words, another gold ribbon score, a very good score. We'd say drink it between now and the next 1 to 2 years, so 20 to 22. It's $20, this wine. That's an incredibly low price for a wine of such character. Very smart indeed. What else could we tell you about it? Probably what the winemaker would like to eat with it. And Darryl Catlin has said that he would like to serve Peking duck in pancakes with this, and I think that would be just about perfect. He's got a second choice, foie gras. So if you've got deep enough pockets and you've got access to good foie gras, you can try that. It would probably work very well, but the duck will do me quite happily. So it's a rosé with a bit more weight and a bit more character. They've tried to do something a bit more with this than your average rosé and succeeded hands down. That's a terrific wine. So we're halfway, so we take another couple of questions. And Julie says, how does a Soave compare? That's a good point. I didn't mention Soave. Soave is made with Garganiga, predominantly up in the northeastern corner in the Veneto, northeastern corner of Italy. Soave, of course, Julie, I know you know as well as I do, Julie Ashmead this is, that Soave can be various different things. A bit like Fiano can be a range of things. It depends if it's been barrel fermented. It depends if it's come from a great single vineyard like Pierre Pan's La Rocca or something like that. That's a very different sort of wine to your run-of-the-mill Soave, which is much more delicate, light-bodied, simple, fruit-driven, crisp, and with a very, very low intensity personality. In other words, I'm not going to say it's a bland wine. Some of them are very bland. But all I'm saying is that wines that have a strong personality like Gewürztraminer or Sauvignon Blanc are much harder to match with food, in my opinion. Something like Soave is a really good food wine, as long as it's a good quality Soave, and there's a lot of rubbish, I'm sorry to say, out there. But good Soave is a wonderful wine, no doubt about it. Victoria, James says, did it take a long time for Italian varieties to be planted in Australia? And if so, why? Are they harder to grow? I sort of touched on that in the introduction a bit, Vic. Basically, I think that Australia, being colonised by the British, very much looked towards France, as well as to a lesser extent Spain and Portugal, but mainly to France and Germany for its wine culture, at least in the early days. We didn't look at Italy so much because the British weren't drinking that much Italian wine in those early days of Australia's history as a colony. So it took us a while to get around to the Italian varieties, but inevitably, because so many Italian migrants came out here after the wars and started to grow grapes and make wine in their backyards, a lot of them, and then they start wineries and wine companies, inevitably we cottoned on to the fact that Italy had some wonderful grape varieties. And in the early days, it was not easy to bring vine stock into the country either. It still isn't. We have quarantine laws. So people had to be really committed if they wanted to import vine stock in the early days. So I think, yeah, those are probably the main reasons why it took us a while. The other reason, of course, is the food culture. We didn't develop our food culture, not our really good food culture that you and I know, until comparatively recently. But with a developed food culture comes a developed wine culture. The two things go hand in hand. Daryl, I'm only supposed to do 2 questions, but I'm going to give Daryl a run here. Daryl, the winemaker of the Catlin Rosé. He says, I love Greek varieties and want to make some of these eventually. Are we still scared as a nation of things we cannot pronounce? Yeah, we are, unfortunately. Absolutely. Ayoyitiko. It took me ages to learn how to pronounce that. You know, there are some wonderful grape varieties in Greece. And yes, we will get them eventually, I'm sure, but it'll take someone like you, who's a bit of a pioneer, to maybe, and Chino Mavro, yes, of course, to bring these in, if they're not already here, to plant them out and to try and create a market for them, because there's no point producing these wines if nobody buys them. That's the hard thing. It's one thing to produce a great wine from a variety no one's ever heard of and can't pronounce, but you have to be able to sell it. That's the hard thing. Yeah, I'll give it a run. You produce me a Chino Mavro, I'll give it a run. Okay, moving along to some red, and I'll change my glass to a red glass, and we're going to continue the theme of Montepulciano. We've got 3 Montepulcianos tonight, which is quite an interesting, lucky thing that happened. And this wine is a dry red from Montepulciano, and it's from Bellwether. Bellwether is a really interesting organisation of one woman, pretty much. I think it's Sue Bell and Sue Bell and Sue Bell, and she lives in the Coonawarra district. And she is a seriously credentialed winemaker who is a trained and educated winemaker who worked for many years with Hardy's in the southeast of South Australia, and struck out on her own. And a few years ago, about 10 years ago, she bought the old Glenroy shearing shed, which is in the north part of Coonawarra. It's an 1868 shearing shed made out of Mount Gambier stone, and it's a beautiful thing. It was an architect-designed building, and has an interesting story because it was built by Chinese labourers. And these Chinese labourers had come to Australia to dig up gold during the gold rush in the 1860s, and they couldn't arrive in Victoria for some reason. So they jumped ship in Robe on the limestone coast of South Australia, and they walked across land all the way from there to the Victorian goldfields. And on the way, just to earn some cash, some of them stopped in Coonawarra and built this shearing shed, which is a wonderful thing. And it was shearing sheep right up until the time that Sue bought it, I believe. And she has converted it into a winery, a cellar door, a sort of a restaurant, I suppose. She does food there. She has a kitchen garden, a community kitchen, she calls it. And she has a camping ground, and she does glamping. And there are some 500-year-old red gums dotted around this winery. So I hope she doesn't pitch the tents underneath them, because branches can fall off them. So that's a little bit about Sue's background. Yes, she does make a Coonawarra Cabernet, of course, because she's in Coonawarra and she loves Cabernet. But she makes wines from various different regions. She produces a Chardonnay from Tasmania under the Bellwether label, and various other wines. But she also has this second series called the Ant series, and this is the Ant series. And they're less expensive wines. This is a $30 wine, and they come from different districts mostly. And the Montepulciano for this comes from the Riverland. And I mentioned before that Montepulciano is very much suited to the hotter, drier parts of Australia. I won't go over that again, but obviously the Riverland is one place where they are doing great things with Montepulciano. And this comes from, the grapes come from Ashley Ratcliffe's Ricatera Farms, which is one of the most progressive grape growers in the Riverland, who produces his own wine, by the way, under the name Ricatera. So that's Sue in a nutshell. She also won the Australian Society for Viticulture and Enology Winemaker of the Year Award in 2014. Now that's probably the most serious award that winemakers can get, because it's an award made by their peers. So it's a pretty good accolade for her. She is a very humble woman who doesn't shout herself from the rooftops. And she says her most proud achievement was winning the blue ribbon for veggies at the Panola show. Good on you, Sue. Now, this wine, totally the antithesis of her Coonawarra Cabernet, which is a powerful statuesque wine which needs to be aged for several years before you drink it, and which will last for like 20, 30 years. This is a drink now wine. This is a drink now red wine, 2019, so only 18 months old. Colour is deep purple red, beautiful, fresh, youthful colour. And you think, wow, this is going to be pretty powerful for a young wine to drink now. But it's not, it's soft, and it's beautifully designed as a medium-bodied drink now wine. Lovely aromas of spices, pepper, cloves, plums, aniseed. Very much a fruit wine. It's not, if it's been aged in oak, very little oak maturation there. Medium-bodied, let's taste it. Exactly that. Medium-bodied, refreshing, lively, high-energy wine with lots of fruit flavour, but not too much tannin, not too much heaviness to it. The tannins are there, and the tannins give it backbone, structure, and they draw the length of the palate out beautifully. They will enable it to go well with food, but they're not the sort of tannins that you need to, you would say, no, gee, can't drink that yet, put it away for a few years. No way. That is a beautiful, immediately drinkable wine, which would go well with food and will age for a little while, I'm sure, but who knows. Montepulciano from the Riverland doesn't have a long track record, so we don't really know how long it will age. We scored it 92 out of 100. We've said drink it now until 10 years hence, 9 or 10 years hence. That's a fair guess, I suppose. It'll probably last longer. It's $30 a bottle, so it's not expensive. I think that's a very, very good wine, and it's beautifully designed as an early drinking wine, which will go well with food. What does Sue suggest that we serve with it? Spicy braised eggplant, an Afghan dish. Well, there you go. I would never expect anything conventional from Sue, and she hasn't disappointed. An Afghan spicy braised eggplant. Well, if she thinks it's good, I'm not going to take issue with that. I would have had something with more protein perhaps, but I would love to give the spicy braised eggplant a run. That sort of spicy flavored wine does strike chords, I think, with spicy food, so that would be very compatible. Okay, so moving on to the next wine, which is the final Montepulciano. And this is the Atze's Corner. Atze's Corner, how they pronounce it in the Barossa, which is where all things Deutsch hang out. And this is another rendition of this grape variety, which is quite a versatile grape variety. Atze's Corner, let's tell you a bit about Atze's Corner. It's a family business, but it's a fairly new label. Kaleski family. The Kaleski family are everywhere in the Barossa. There must be 5 or 6 of them that are producing wine in the Barossa, most notably the Kaleski label itself, which is out at Greenock. This Kaleski is Andy Kaleski, and he is a cousin, and he's, I think, in his early 40s. He started this brand only a few years ago. But his family have been growing grapes for a long time, and they have some old Shiraz vineyards that they make amazing wines from. Eddie's, the Eddie's Old Vine is one of their fantastic wines. Another one is called Boehm's Block. Really good wines. Shiraz, of course, and the Barossa are famous, but Montepulciano and the Barossa is something that's fairly new. The Koleski family, their ancestor came to the Barossa in 1843. So along with a lot of those early Prussian and Silesian settlers at the same time. Atze, the Atze name is Andy Koleski's great-grandmother. She was a member of the Atze family and married a Koleski. Why is it called Atze's Corner? Because there is a corner in the road in the Barossa, and their part of the Barossa, which has a kink in it. It runs from Nero down to Research Road on the way to Angaston. And if it went in a straight line, it would have run through the middle of the Atze family's house. They didn't want that, of course. So they said to the road builders, if you put a kink in the road and go around the house, we'll give you a few flagons of port. And the guys building the road said, okay, it's a deal. And they did that. So, and there's a kink in the road, and that's known locally as Atze's Corner. So there's a story behind everything. There's another story behind the name of this wine, which is the Mob. Montepulciano, the Mob Montepulciano. Why is it called the Mob? Because when they planted this vineyard, there was a hole in the fence, and a mob of sheep went through the hole in the fence and stripped the vines and almost killed them. They were very young vines at the time and very susceptible to damage by sheep. The vines did recover, and 2 or 3 years later, they produced their first crop, and they've been making a Montepulciano ever since. They called it the Mob in memory of those naughty sheep. So this is a serious Montepulciano with very deep colour and a lot of body and richness to it. Let's have a taste. And the first thing about it is it's quite reductive. This wine needs to be decanted, splashed around in a decanter, and given lots of air because it's a bit reductive. But there are lots of rich black fruit underneath that. Wow. Let's have a taste. That is a stunning wine. That's got a lot of intensity. It's got great flavour. There's nothing dirty about it. That's the curious thing. The wine can be sulfitic, which is reductive on the nose. But this wine, it's not a problem with this wine because it tastes so good. It's clean. There's a lot of dark berry fruits there. Wonderful wine and structure. It has got a lot of backbone, but it's not astringent at all. It is, the tannins are there, but they're nicely smooth, ripe tannins and a very, very long aftertaste. We scored at 94, which is a very high silver, almost a gold. And it's a top-ranked wine. It was rated number 2 out of 16 Montepulcianos from that vintage from South Australia. So a high-ranking wine. And we're suggesting that you can drink it now and for the next 7 or 8 years. It will be really good. $35 a bottle. And as long as you don't mind that bit of funky sulphide on the nose, it is a stunner of a wine. A really good wine to demonstrate decanting with, in my view. So Andy Koleski, what did he, we asked him what sort of food he'd serve with it. And of course, he said, sheep. Get your revenge on that mob. So his suggestion is, because of the mob's ill deeds, serve this with grilled lamb with a nice blueberry sauce or even a dark chocolate pepper sauce. I've never had a dark chocolate pepper sauce, Andy, but I will bow to your experience there. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Certainly needs protein, and meat I think is great with that, and slow cooked lamb would be terrific with that wine. Okay, 2 wines to go, and we need to have some questions. So Scylla, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Scylla says, what other Italian varieties are planned to be grown in Australia in the future, if any? There are lots, I think, Scylla. I think there are so many that it's really hard to know where to start. we have a lot of varieties in the ground now that are producing wine and producing good wine. What will be grown in the future is not as easy for me to predict, because I don't know what's in the minds of people who are doing these things. I mean, the Chalmers family down at Heathcote brought in an enormous amount of Italian varieties, and they probably have lots of varieties in their collection which could still be explored, and which probably aren't being explored. Lambrusco, for example, there's only one company I know of that's making a Lambrusco in Australia. And you might say, well, who cares? Who cares? It's just ordinary wine. Well, no, there is such a thing as a really good Lambrusco. If people try harder and treat it seriously, even some ordinary, or what you might think of as ordinary grape varieties, can produce very good wine. So I think the jury is still out. I'm sorry I can't be more illuminating. Can we have Sue's spicy eggplant recipe? We'll do something about that later. Michael Horstman says, are the Italian varieties better suited to climate change? I think I've probably answered that. Some of them are. Certainly those that come from the south of Italy where it's hotter and drier, and from Sicily especially. Nerello Mascalese, for example, which is grown on Mount Etna. I think there's a big future for that in Australia. We already have Montepulciano. We have Zinfandel, which is known as Primitivo in the Puglia region of Italy. They grew Primitivo down there. It's the same thing as Zinfandel. Again, that's a variety that we can use here, and we do use, but we don't use it enough. Okay, moving on to the second last wine, which is Piccoli Lotti. This is you might think there was an Italian family behind this, but there isn't. Kirrihill is in Clare Valley, and as far as I know, there's no Italian in the organisation. It's not a very old winery, Kirrihill. It only goes back to 1998. It's just outside Clare, the town of Clare, to the east of Clare. They have vineyards there, they grow grapes there, they make Clare Valley wine, but they also buy grapes from the Adelaide Hills and McLaren Vale, and this is a McLaren Vale wine. Why is it called Piccoli Lotti? Because Piccoli Lotti means small production or small lot, small batch, and this is one of their more experimental varieties that they don't produce a large amount of. That's why it's called that name. And they do several wines under this Piccoli Lotti series. I cannot tell you a great deal about Kirrihill. I can tell you that they have a new chief winemaker as of, I think, just before this vintage, whose name is Susie Micken, and she joined them December before last, and she's completed 32 vintages, or had at that stage, across Australia, Spain, China, and America, and has great experience all over the world, and has worked in small, large, and multinational companies. And that sounds like she is the goods. And the wines that I've tasted recently from Kirrihill have been very, very good indeed. So this wine was made not totally conventionally. There was a bit of carbonic maceration with this wine, which means that they put the whole bunches into a tank, sealed it up with carbon dioxide, and let it sit there for a while until the enzymes in the grapes break down the tannins in the skin and soften the wine. So the whole point of carbonic maceration is to soften the wine. And then it was fermented fairly conventionally. Let's taste the wine, see how it is. It's got a good colour, nice bright colour, good youthful colour. And there is definitely a lot of spice on the nose. There's some oak there. There's Chinese 5 spice. There's pepper. There's clove. There's maybe even a touch of star anise, which would be very much in keeping with the 5 spice comment. Really nice nose. There is perhaps a bit more oak showing in this wine than the other wines we've had, but certainly not too much. And a really, really lively, powerful, a very youthful and bold sort of a palate. It's got lots of get up and go. There is a long finish there, and there's quite firm tannins. So I can see why they wanted to use carbonic maceration to soften those tannins a bit and make it more approachable young. I think that wine is just starting to drink well, and it will probably be even better in another year or two. We scored at 91, which is a silver ribbon, and it was number 3 out of 16 Nero d'Avola from South Australia in that vintage, 2018. We've said drink it now and for 10 years. I'm thinking it will last for quite a lot longer than that, but we haven't seen the track record of this wine, so it's better to be a little conservative. $27 a bottle. That's pretty good value in my view. We asked the winemaker if she would like to recommend a food match, and she said that she served it recently with slow-cooked beef brisket. Sounds very good to me. And she says the boldness of the Nero needs rich, meaty dishes or a really soft cheese. Totally, I think it's probably very good comments. And the wine certainly needs food at the moment. I wouldn't drink that alone. It really has a bit too much backbone to have by itself. It really copes with food very well indeed. Piccoli, Lotti, Nero d'Avola. I think Nero d'Avola has a big future. It's a variety that we're only just starting to see good results with in Australia. Unfortunately, the Italians are trying to stop us using the name Nero d'Avola because Avola, I believe, is the name of a town, and they're then arguing that it's a geographic name which nobody else should use but the Italians. Oh well. So at least one winery I can think of just calls their wine Nero in deference to this, to the wishes of the Italians. Well, we'll wait and see what happens. It's all part of the trade negotiations. So moving on to the last wine of the night, which is an amazingly interesting wine called Vino Intrepido. Blood of my blood, Sangiovese. So it's the only Sangiovese we've had tonight. But Sangiovese, as I mentioned, is the most widely grown grape in Italy. It's very adaptable. It's grown in a lot of places. It suits a lot of places in Australia. It's amazing we haven't had more really good Sangiovese before, but it's taken, I think, people like the Pizzini family and others in the King Valley and of course, Mark Lloyd at Coriole, to really wave the flag for this variety and encourage others to make good Sangiovese. It's not an easy variety. Australians who are brought up on fruity wines, dark-coloured wines, blackberry kind of wines will probably not go for Sangiovese, at least not immediately. It's not a wine for beginners. It's a wine that you come to after you've discovered other wines because it's very savoury, it's very Italian, it's not fruity at all, but it's complex and it's structured. It's serious wine with great hidden depths, and it goes wonderfully with food. So, to me, that's everything that Italian wines are. Vino Intrepido. This is a man called James Scaresbrook, who worked in retailing, I think, in Victoria. James is he's been in the wine industry for a while, but he's only recently started his own brand in 2016, having completed a master's degree in wine business at the University of Adelaide. So he's got the business qualification, and he's obviously good at making wine. Blood of my blood, he called Vino Intrepido. Obviously, there's a suggestion there that that he is, a fearless thrill-seeker winemaker who's having a go at stuff that is not conventional. I think that's probably exactly the truth. So he does grow or produce wines from various different Italian varieties. Friulano, which is one of the more obscure and difficult varieties. Nebbiolo, which is not exactly easy. He does a Rosé, or a Rosato if you're Italian. He does a Fiano and a Pinot Grigio, as well as this Sangiovese. So he's had a great love of Italy for a long time. He travelled a lot in Italy. He grew up with a step grandfather who was Italian, and a lot of these things got him interested in all things Italian. So it's resulted in him very recently in starting his own label, which I think is a fantastic label. Every wine has a similar design but different words. They've all got intriguing names like Blood of My Blood. What does it mean, Blood of My Blood? Sangiovese is like blood. In French, it's sang. I'm sure it has a Latin root, which is Sanjo or something like that. Sangiovese is Jove, the blood of Jove. So I believe there is also a connection with Game of Thrones, but not being a watcher of Game of Thrones, I have no idea what it is. But James assures me that there is a connection. So he gravitated towards all things Italian, and he obviously has, this is only the third time he's made a Sangiovese, but he obviously has the sensitivity for making these sorts of wines, because it is such a good, I was going to say an impersonation of an Italian Sangiovese, but I'm sure he's not trying to copy Italian Sangiovese. Most people in Australia who make these varieties are not trying to copy, they're trying to produce an Australian version of that variety, a version of that variety that represents the vineyard and the region that it comes from here. So obviously it's going to be different soils, different climates. But this wine is not a deep coloured wine, medium depth, red purple colour. If you were judging wine on its colour, you would probably expect that to be a bit ordinary, but no, it's not ordinary. And when you smell it, it's not a wine that you can sniff and say, oh yeah, blackberries, or oh yeah, dark cherries. It's a wine of incredible complexity and layers. It's got so many hidden depths to it. The more you sniff it, the more you find. Dried herbs, dried flowers, dried fruits, cured meats, bresaola, charcuterie, all sorts of interesting things happening in that wine. Everything except simple fruit. And I'm sure that's exactly what he was after. Let's have a taste. Wow, it certainly doesn't disappoint. Terrific intensity. It's a big wine, but it's not a heavy wine. It's much more full-bodied than you might expect from the colour. It's not a pale colour, it's just not a dark colour for a one-year-old wine. But the intensity and the length of palate are really remarkable in that wine. The quality of the tannins is exactly what you would get in a good Italian Sangiovese. They're persuasive tannins, they're insistent tannins, they're firm, and they will go wonderfully with food, but they're not hard or astringent or green in any way. No way. It's a beautiful wine. And I think that, yeah, we scored at 93. Well, I think probably, you know, it could have go even higher than that with certainly in a year or two when it becomes even more complex and even a bit softer. So 93 is a good, strong silver ribbon score. We've said drink it now until 10 years hence. Again, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't go longer than that, but 10 years would do it very easily without any problem. It is $35 a bottle, and that is a steal. That is a really good value for money. It was scored, it's a top ranked score, number 4 out of 27 Sangioveses from Australia in 2019 vintage. So a very high ranking wine. We asked the winemaker, James Scaresbrook, what he would serve with it. And sure enough, he's been very traditional. He's gone for Bistecca Fiorentina, which is of course a really thick cut T-bone steak, which they serve in Tuscany. Or perhaps his second choice is a slow cooked wild boar. Well, you know, haven't seen too many wild boar lately in Australia, but we might have to wait till we can go back to Italy for that. Or if you're a vegetarian, a mushroom risotto. Wonderful idea. I think all of those things would go superbly with that. As I've said before, it is a very adaptable food wine, as great Italian wines and Italian varietals are. Adaptability, great with food, beautiful stuff. I really think that's a good note to finish on. And we are just about out of time, but I'm going to take a couple of quick questions. Marcus says, in regards to food friendliness, is there a trend towards medium-bodied reds and away from full-bodied like Shiraz? In a word, yes. Absolutely. For too long in Australia, we've made all red varieties full-bodied, and it's ridiculous. It's taken us a long time to discover that there's a place at the table for lighter-bodied reds, medium-bodied reds, soft reds, heavy reds, tannic reds, soft, mild reds. There's so many food combinations with wine, and I'm just so happy that we are now making lots of really good light to medium bodied red wines in Australia. It's a great bit of progress. John Foster, the place of charmers in the introduction of Italian varieties. Go to the Real Review and look and search through old posts for charmers, Chalmers, and you'll find information about the Chalmers family there. The Chalmers family have been probably as important as anybody in the introduction of new varieties to the Australian wine industry in recent years, in the last 20, 25 years, 30 years. They've done an amazing job. 2 generations of the Chalmers family have been doing this. They are the go-to people if you are starting a vineyard and you want some Italian varieties that are a bit obscure and a bit hard to find. Okay, Ruth says, what's the most popular or best-selling Italian variety in the Australian market from a consumer point of view? Where do you think this will go in the future? What's the most popular or best-selling Italian variety? Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio is the third, or Pinot Gris to give it its other French name, is the third most planted Australian white variety in the Australian industry. So there's no doubt, there's no competition as to which is the biggest selling, the most popular Italian variety. And to think that only a few years ago, 20 years ago, Pinot Grigio was just starting to poke its head up and it was considered an alternative variety. Now it's very much a mainstream variety. And that can happen with other varieties too, and I'm sure it will. What's happened here with Pinot Grigio is a bit like what's happened in New Zealand with Sauvignon Blanc, but perhaps not to quite the same degree. But it's a similar kind of amazingly fast rise. Okay, that's enough. We've gone over time. I better let you all go to dinner. Thank you for your company. It's been wonderful to have you on board. Please subscribe to The Real Review if you don't already. We'd love to have you. If you want to buy the wines, we're not selling them, but we do provide a click-through to what we call the seller door-to-door facility on our Real Review website. So you can order them direct from the winery. Please tune in again on Thursday, the 1st of October, and I'll be talking about aromatic whites. It'll be the first time we've done a pure white wine webinar. So that's it from me tonight. Thank you again for coming along, and good night.